Hello and good afternoon to you. How's everybody doing today? I am your humble, happy, and hairy host, Bill Sylvie. Good to see you guys. Happy Friday. We made it. We made it to another weekend. Depending on where you are in the world, you may still have some time to go, but things are just groovy here. Oh, look, Facebook doesn't want to start. There we go. Facebook's getting warmed up. So, man, have I got a lot to do today, tomorrow, and Sunday. It is going to be busy as all get out. Monday might just be me slumped in my chair going, I have just got a lot of things going on, but I definitely wanted to get the stream up today and talk to you guys because if you missed yesterday's paint stream live, then of course, and if the metrics are anything to go by, you did. We had some pretty good discussion yesterday while I was painting some miniatures, and I need you guys to hang on for just a second. I need to step away over here because it occurred to me that's better. There we go. It's early at night. I was listening to a different video and suddenly there's some very ominous humming. That kind of thing. Like a psychic attack. Anyway, I didn't have my studio lights up there, so I wanted to get those on. So you could better see my smiling face. Anyway, Paul B. Brought up an interesting point about henchmen yesterday. And I don't know where you're coming from in terms of D&D. I know a lot of folks who watch the channel now, you come from diverse places. You aren't necessarily just neckbeards like myself, like my Wednesday co-host Kyle. You know, you've got a lot of different experiences with D&D. And the one thing that I've noticed, and this isn't as editions have gone on, but as D&D went on, and I mean even back in the day, was how depreciated the idea of having henchmen and hirelings became. And I just wanted to talk about him for a little while today. I think the mindset was so prevalent back in the 70s and 80s with D&D. I mean, we have here on the table, which I know you guys can't see, I'm pointing to something you can't see, but an entire set of miniatures that are just henchmen and hirelings from Grenadier. They're not adventurers. They're not even townspeople to just have as basically 0 hit point having scatter terrain that looks good. These are specifically henchmen and hirelings to use in your D&D games in various forms. We have a couple of guys carrying chests. Well, 1, 2, 3. 3 guys carrying chests of loot. 1 guy carrying a wounded soldier. Another guy doing some engineering work. He's got a chisel and a hammer like he's about to hit something. Some hapless guy, you could either say he's testing a potion, pausing for a drink, what have you, a couple of link bearers, and then just kind of a general equipment guy, or link boys. And I want to talk a little bit about their role in role-playing games and why you should be using them regardless of what D&D you're playing. Fourth notwithstanding, because Fourth wasn't really much of a D&D game. It was more D&D tactics than anything else. But to move on, we're going to take a look at Ye Olde Dungeon Master's Guide. because this, of course, is your go-to for all things core D&D, just in my opinion. Like, if you're playing third and you've got like a homebrew kit bashed third that, you know, you've lashed together with some steel cables and some supporting pins and so on, and it's been moving along perfectly for the last decade, but you've never looked at the 1E Dungeon Master's Guide, go to DM's Guild, go to DriveThruRPG, go to RPG Now, and get yourself a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide. Get a PDF or get a print on demand. I recommend a print on demand just so you've got a physical copy, because it makes great reading just wherever you are, unless you're one of those people who are like, no, I go with my phone and I digitally do everything, in which case, you know, the PDF is your jam. That's all about you. But get yourself a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide in some form. You don't have to track down a copy on eBay or scour your local used bookstores, unless that's your jam, right? If your whole thing is, I want to go out and I want to find a copy from back in the day, then you do you. But you can get a perfectly serviceable brand new copy from RPG Now. And Cerulean Knight, we're going to get into the hirelings. We're going to answer your question here very shortly. I run an AD&D game on Monday night, and I currently have 11 players. Those 11 players have 4 Lightfoot, and I'm going to explain what these terms mean shortly. They have 4 Lightfoot. They have, I think now it's 11 Heavyfoot and 9 Light Cavalry. They have 2 Teamsters and an oxen-drawn cart. So that's 4 and 11 is 15, and 9 is 24, and 2 is 26. There's 11 of them and 26 hirelings that they have. They're a very, very well-appointed unit. And you may think, well, wow, that's a lot of stuff to manage. It's not really, because when they campaign in force, the Lightfoot, the Heavyfoot, and the Light Horse, they're just for overland and watching their encampment. Cerulean says, 11 players, can you even keep up with all their actions? Yes, I can. Yes, I can. And we can go into managing players in another video, but talking about their hirelings and their henchmen and why it's important. If your DM is worth his salt, and I hate to bring this up and say, you know, if your DM's doing a good job, he should be threatening your players. But if your DM's worth his salt, he's not going to be hand-waving things like, well, we set up a camp before you go in the dungeon. Okay, well, you know, there's 5 of you, and you all rode your horses there, or, you know, 4 of you on horse, and then your magic user says he has a cart, your wizard, sorcerer, whatever they're calling them these days, and, you know, he's got a card, you know, that he keeps his various study equipment in. And so on. So you park that in the A parking lot in front of the dungeon, and then you go in, and you're in there for a day, a couple of days, a week, if it's a really, really sprawling underworld. What's happening to your gear? Who's feeding your horses? Who's making your horses don't wind up being fed to something else? All of those things should be taken into consideration for the sense that you're in a living world and not just in a video game. And in those situations, that's where hirelings become really important. Because, yeah, you're not going to take them down to the 20th level of a mega dungeon and fight multiple type 6 demons in a single battle. No. Your hirelings have got anywhere from 1 to 7 hit points max. And even if you wrap them up in plate mail and so on, generally speaking, all it's going to take is 1 or 2 hits and they're dead. But what they should be doing is keeping an eye on your equipment and so on. Now, there's another question, and it's a question of loot. So let's say you go down to the 9th level, you beat the pair of mated red dragons, you've got 107,000 gold pieces, 32,000 silver pieces, 57,000 copper pieces, and on and on and on and on. You've got literal tons and tons of treasure that you can haul out. Who's going to carry it out? Just you guys? Or are you going to hire some porters and bearers once you've cleaned the dungeon out? Somebody comes out of the dungeon and says, all right, guys, come on in. Now, usually, generally speaking, these guys are going to be human. How are they going to grope their way along a dungeon? Understand, this is just they're not leveled adventurers. They're not going to be getting better at this. All right? So, and odds are you're not just going to be handing out magic weapons. They need to see. So, you've got to have link boys. And a link boy is basically a lantern bearer. So, before we get too much into the specifics, into the details, let's crack open the Dungeon Master's Guide and let's talk about all the types of henchmen and all the types of hirelings that you can have in a campaign. I should have marked this page, and I did not. And I'm not just rattling off AD&D stuff to you. All of the things in here are rules agnostic, almost to a fault. You can use them in any version of AD&D. So let's see. So, standard hirelings cover professions, a bearer or a porter. That's the guys, they're going to carry your goods, chests, that sort of thing. They might even carry other wounded hirelings out for you. Strong backs, obedient, and they're going to cost you a silver piece a day or a gold piece a month. See, that's why you take the silver and the copper. All right, you take it for payroll. That way you're not having to give these guys gold. Hey, similarly, just kind of a preamble talking about why hirelings are good things. We're going into the specifics now. Then you've got a carpenter. Now you may think, well, a carpenter is not that important, isn't it? Wouldn't you want someone who can shore something up? I mean, I had an adventuring group that hired a group of 10 carpenters, and they built and then sealed doorways in the dungeon to lessen the wandering monster surprises and to hem in wandering monsters. It was brilliant. A leather worker. Now that's a guy you're not going to take into the dungeon with you, but you might want to have one in your camp. Why? Because stuff like green slime exists. Stuff like gray ooze exists, and black puddings, and fire damage. All right? If you've got a character or characters who rely on leather armor, such as a druid, a thief, so on and etc., having a leather worker in the party is brilliant. Plus, he can work on tack and harness and, other goods, backpacks, boots. A limner. Now, a limner is someone who creates illuminated drawings. And if you don't know what an illuminated drawing is, if you've ever seen like an old medieval Bible and it's got a big gilt, like, chapter 1, verse 1 of Genesis in the beginning, and the eye takes up a quarter of this massive page, and it's like gold painted calligraphy on a green background with angels in the corner and scroll work along the sides and bottoms. That's what a limner does. So that might be someone that you'd want to chronicle your journeys and put them in a nice volume for the punters to read. That's more of a town hireling, but it is someone, you can pick up. A link boy. Your link boys, they carry your torches and your lanterns. They've usually got some extra oil. Pretty damn handy to have if you've got an all-human party. The magic user, he needs both of his hands free, but he might also need to read off of a scroll. So a limner, a link boy standing near the magic user, that's kind of key. Plus, if he's got a torch and the magic user's throwing Molotov cocktails, flasks of oil that have been lit alight, just being able to lean over and stick it in the wick of a torch, or the wick of a lantern, or the flame of a torch before he throws it. Plus, the link boy can lend you a pint of oil. If he's got a lantern and 4 pints of oil, you can say, "Hey, give me one of those flasks of oil." Mason, again, that's a long-term campaign character. Stonemason builds walls. A pack handler. Now, again, this is a guy that's going to work with your porters and bearers on getting, if you've got the 4 bearers bringing treasure out of the dungeon, he's going to be the one that's going to be able to load up the horses and the mules. Tailor. Okay, sea leather worker. All right, your magic user gets green slime dripped all over him, but the party is able to save him. Now he's in the buff. Nobody wants a wizard walking around naked. Nobody. You got a tailor who can mend clothes and take care of that sort of thing. On a long, multi-month journey across your campaign world, a leather worker and a tailor, he'd be a lifesaver. Teamster. Absolutely essential. They keep your horses, pack animals, animals that haul wagons, they keep them in line. They know how to deal with them. They know how to treat with them as far as taking care of any injuries, that sort of thing. They know how to unhook wagons quickly or hook them up quickly. And then you've got a valet / lackey. And I know lackey is just, now it's just a general term, just like, oh, this guy's a lackey. But a valet, he's the dude that's going to bring you your freshly polished boots and make sure they got polished, your pressed shirts and so on. That's more of an in-town hireling, more of a flavorful game kind of thing. And they're all well defined, and if you get a copy of the Dungeon Master's Guide for first edition, this is all on page 128, or I'm sorry, on page 28. Now, as far as where to hire them, there's some given rules for that. All of these professions, if you're dungeon mastering or if you're a player looking for them, all of these professions should be in larger towns and cities. The smaller the village, the less likely you are to find at least people willing to adventure of some of the other classes, like a limner, a valet, a tailor. In a village of a couple hundred people, you're probably not going to find a valet. And a tailor and a leather worker are not going to want to go, and there might only be one limner, and he works for the church as a scribe. But in your larger cities, finding these guys is easier. They've got some, Gary has some suggestion for employment. Let's see. Cerulean says, do I use any numerical mechanics with the hirelings, or is it all about the authenticity? I'm going to answer that question in just a few minutes, but briefly, yes, there are times when you use mechanical. You do go to game mechanics for it, and these mechanics are extremely portable. Again, whatever version of D&D you're playing, you can you can pick this up. You can pick these rules up and use them. So moving on. So under duties, it says, it is not practical to determine the time and expenses necessary to accomplish everything possible for the scores of standard hirelings possible to employ for each DM to have. So each DM will have to decide. Sorry, I don't have my readers up. For example, assume that a player character hires a tailor to make plain blue cloaks for all of his or her henchmen. This will take about 1 day per garment and cost the stated amount of money plus 5 copper pieces, 10% of the cost of a cloak, per cloak for materials. However, if the same cloaks were to be fashioned of a material of unusual color and have some device also sewed upon them, time and material costs would be at least double standard and probably more. So that's just a tiny handful of guys you could be taking on your adventures. But let's get into expert hirelings. Let's get into the guys that absolutely, positively you're gonna want to accompany you on a campaign. Expert hirelings. An alchemist. Now, I think that just speaks for itself. Now, generally, if you're hiring an alchemist long-term on contract to concoct magic potions, to preserve potion components, like, we killed a beholder, and now we've got, like, all the beholder's eyes. Well, let's get those in brine and get them back to Gelnog, the unreliable, and have him preserve those long term so we can use those for spell components in the future or for potion components in the future. Setting up a lab for your alchemist in a city so you can have potions of healing made, you can have magical inks made, and so on and etc. That is absolutely key. So some of these I'll read from the description of. So alchemist. This profession handles the compounding of magical substances, and the advantages of employing an alchemist are detailed in this section under fabrication of magic items, potions. Alchemists will only be found in cities unless you specifically locate one elsewhere. You, meaning me, the dungeon master, and locate, meaning place. Let's see. It will require an offer of 10 to 100 gold pieces plus bonus money, plus a well-stocked laboratory, plus the assurance of not less than a full year of employment to attract one to service. So alchemists, while important, not cheap. And I want to jump back a little bit. When I was listing off those kind of mundane hirelings, and of course Simile asked me about mechanics, there's daily and monthly costs for all of these guys enumerated out here in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So going down, a bearer, a porter, a silver piece a day, or a gold piece a month. a carpenter 3 silver piece a day, or 2 gold piece a month. And there's additional cost also. Monthly rate assumes that quarters are provided for the hireling, and that these quarters contain a bed and like necessities. So you're not just telling these guys come along. But are you getting the picture here? Getting hirelings into your game, it organically grows your game. It's like coral. These guys add stuff to your game. They don't detract and slow down. You're building an entire world. Now, okay, I want to hire just a carpenter. Carpenter's got to have a place to live. I got to find a place to live for the carpenter. And it goes on and on like that. And you build up. And suddenly your game isn't just, move the 5 adventurers into the dungeon space. Move them back and forth until no monsters are moving. Collect all treasure. Move out. It's an organic growth process of your campaign to have the henchmen and hireling elements in it. And you are really, really, really doing a good thing with your game when you're having these guys in here. But there's prices all the way down. Like the limner that I mentioned, 10 silver pieces a month. 10 silver pieces a day, 10 gold pieces a month. And that's a pretty penny, even when you're around 3rd, 4th level. Do you really want an illuminated volume of all your adventures and encounters? You might have to weigh that. They do all sign painting, drawing of herald devices, and so on. So anyway, let's get back. So an alchemist. Now, this is expert hireling table of monthly cost in gold pieces. You're not going to be hiring an alchemist at 1st level, at least not in AD&D. 300 gold pieces a month minimum. And you've got to set the guy up with a lab, and you got to keep him a steady supply of stuff to experiment on. Armorer. Well, I think that one kind of speaks for itself. Your armor, regardless of whether it's mundane or magical, it gets damaged. You've got to have an armorer. And that's 100 gold pieces a month. And it notes here for the armorer, cost does not include all remuneration or special fees. Add 10% of the usual cost of items handled or made by these hirelings on a per case basis, i.e. an armorer makes a set of plate mail, which has a normal cost of 400 gold pieces, so 10%, 40 gold pieces, is added to the cost of maintaining the blacksmith. And then you've got a blacksmith. Blacksmith covers a lot of mundane stuff. I mean, there's a whole list here. There's a skill for armorers. There's actually an armorer skill in percentage. You roll percentage dice. 1 to 50. Skill equal to ring, scale, or studded. So about half the time, an armorer you find to hire, he may not be able to repair your plate mail. 51 to 75, equal to above, plus splint. We still don't have a plate mail engineer. 76 to 90, the above plus chain. And it's only the top 10% that can repair plate mail. Plate mail is your powered armor. It is your sappy vest plus interceptor 4 plate with ceramic trauma insert. Plate mail is uncommon stuff. Now, I'm going to jump back here a little bit out of the list, and I want to point out, to give a little bit more definition to the henchmen. If henchmen are defined as the associates, companions, and loyal to some degree, followers of a player character, hirelings are the servitors, mercenaries, and employees of such player characters, and they too can have some degree of loyalty based on accommodations, rate of remuneration, and treatment. Various hirelings of, various hirelings of medial nature are assumed to come with the cost of maintaining a stronghold. Thus, cooks, lackeys, stable boys, sweepers, and various servants are no concern to the player character. Guards and special hirelings are, however, and such persons must be located and enlisted by the PC or his or her NPC henchman. So you can go meta, you can spread out, you can have henchmen, which we'll discuss in just a little bit. You can have henchmen going out and getting hirelings for you if you want. And a lot of these guys won't accompany you into dungeons. They may accompany you on the campaign, or they may be people that you just have in town, like an alchemist, probably like an armorer, probably like a blacksmith. Engineer, architect. This is a guy who can design your strongholds. Engineer, artillerist. This is a dude that can fire catapults, scorpions, ballistae, arbalests, cannon if you include them in your game. Engineer, sapper, miner. Now this is a guy you might actually have come in the dungeon with you. All right? Because this guy might know how to bring down a wall or drill through rock with the right equipment and enough men. Yeah, this is definitely next level stuff. A jeweler and gem cutter. Now there's somebody, again, that's someone that you have on hire either in your stronghold or at the town. You killed all the lizard worshippers of the demon idol of Moloch and pried out the gem eyes. That's awesome. You've got these casserole-sized gem eyes. Nobody's going to buy those. No one merchant's going to have 50,000 gold pieces on hand to buy those. You're going to have to trim those down. You're going to have them cut and shaped into handy, fungible goods to be able to sell to your merchants to trade for stuff. Okay, that's where your gem cutter comes in. And now we come to the real. We're taking these guys on a road march. They're going to defend our camp, so on, bunch. And this is what the majority of my party employs, the majority of these guys is what my party employs. We have long and short bow archers, artillerists, a captain. Now, if you hire a number of foot troops and you need a strong leader for them, because, hey, you might be in the dungeon for a week and a half, all right? You don't want these guys deciding to become bandits. So you're going to have to hire officers. And units of a certain size automatically come with officers who have their own separate pay rates. Crossbowmen, footmen, heavy. And that doesn't refer to their girth. A heavy footman will be like a pike or a footman with lance or something like that. Footman, light. These are you guys with short swords, with spear, and so on. Footman, pikeman. Hobilar. And that's not the guy from Game of Thrones. Hobilar. Let's see. All right. Hobilar, heavy or light. These troops are simply mounted infantry, able to use horses to move, but not capable of mounted combat. Thus, Hobilars ride to battle, but dismount to fight. Some provision must be made to care for the horses, or the Hobilars will leave 25% of their number behind to do so. So you hire 10 Hobilar, 3 of them are going to tend to the horses when they get to the battle. And then horseman, archer, crossbowman, heavy, light, and medium. I think they speak for themselves. Lieutenant, another special kind of officer. So if you had enough, you might have a captain and then a lieutenant reporting to him. A sapper minor. Again, that's a guy you want going in the dungeon with you or helping you lay siege to that wizard's tower. A sergeant. And then slingers. They're just, they're light artillerymen, but rather than use crossbows, longbows, or short bows, they use slings. I'm going to come back to something here. I'm going to skip over something and I'm going to come back to it. Then you have scribes, a ship's crew. If you buy a ship and they're listed for sale, if you have the money and you tell your dungeon master or your players come to you and say, we want to buy a ship, you go right here and you hire a ship's crew. Ship master, same as a sergeant, a captain, or a lieutenant. A spy. That's right. You can hire a spy. If you're doing a large overland campaign, or even if you want someone to scout out potentially an area where a dungeon is, you can hire a spy. Now, if you've hit that name level and you've built your fortress, but you still want to adventure, but you want to leave somebody in charge, you can hire a steward or a castellan. And that's basically your landlord who's in charge of, although the medieval term landlord refers to you, the adventurer. And then you've got a weapon maker, which I think just speaks for itself. So there's all these different kinds of hirelings you can and should have in your game. A lot of people talk about, in D&D, especially in early editions, treasure just piles up and piles up. Not if your players are playing the long campaign, and you as a dungeon master, regardless of what version of D&D you're playing, you should be using these kinds of... Ask your players, who's taking care of the horses when you go in the dungeon? Who's taking care of the castle that you've established your own when you go out adventuring? So you captured the castle. Well, we're going to fix it up. How? Well, we're going to hire some people. Boom. Right here. Pages 28 and 29. It's not edition specific. You can tweak the prices a little bit. Now, who was it? Cerulean was asking about specific numbers. When you go hiring the mercenary soldiers, there's a D10 roll. First of all, you don't know what you're going to find. You're in the city of Greyhawk. You don't just go down to the heavy foot store and say, I want to hire 20 heavy foot. And they just march out of a dispenser and you're handing them all swords. You may go looking. Now, if we go by the bell curve on percentages, odds are you're going to find archer horsemen are going to be what you find, because they're right in that 40 to 50 range. But the number you're going to find, it varies just across the board. You'll roll a d10. There's a whole table here on page 30 that shows the number you're going to encounter. So you may have it in your mind that, I just want like 3 guys to stay outside at the camp and watch the horses. And you find yourself with 10 to 40 pikemen that want to come work for you. And the mercenary soldiers are all detailed out. Now, I told you I was skipping one. This is one of the coolest things in first edition AD&D, and you should absolutely make this part of your campaign. I don't care whether you're playing original D&D, basic, First edition, second, third, 3.5 Pathfinder, 5th edition D&D. You really, really need to include the sage. Sages are fantastic, and the way Gary describes them here, sages are a very special case indeed, for they are the encyclopedias, computers, expert opinions, and sort of demi-oracles of the milieu all rolled into one. Even in a quasi-medieval fantasy world, the sum of human knowledge will be so great and so diverse as to make it nearly impossible for any one sage to know more than a smattering about many things, a fair understanding of their overall field, and a thorough knowledge of their particular specialty or specialties. The general fields of study for sages are shown hereafter, and special areas of expertise listed under each general category. So your party arrives in Verbabank. You've heard about this Temple of Elemental Evil. You want to know all about the Battle of Emerity Meadows. You want to know all about the temple before you ride off to Hamlet. You've got to hire a sage. And there's a whole process where you can, the dungeon master cannot just check to see if a sage knows something. How many fields of knowledge does the sage have? What are those fields of knowledge? Over on page 32, we have an entire raft of possible fields that the sage will know, and it's up to you, to the dungeon master. You know, if the field sage of study is history for demi-humankind, which covers elves, dwarves, halflings, half-elves even, gnomes, and half-orcs, maybe that might have some slight insight. That's up to you as the dungeon master to decide. And then you have a chance of knowing an answer to a question. Is the question out of their field? Like, okay, they have that history of demi-humankind, but you want to know about a magic rock that's rumored. That's out of their field, you know? The odds that they'll have some general or specific knowledge are given percentages, but that they'll have exacting knowledge, it's out of their field. They're not going to have exact specific knowledge. And there's a whole determination of, I mean, sages just goes on and on. The sage section is 3 pages long. Sages, if your characters choose to hire one, sages should be important non-player characters. Give them their own stats. Give them their own personalities. Give them their own quirks. Now, sages will not accompany characters on adventures. That's your mercenary troops. But if you keep a sage on retainer in a city, and it's going to be expensive. Remember when I was talking about all the piles of gold characters would have, and some people say, oh, in old D&D, money would just pile up and you would never have, my characters were millionaires by 7th level. Were you using upkeep for the characters? Were you using hirelings and henchmen and upkeep for them? Because a sage is absolutely going to eat into that. But here we go. Long-term employment of a sage. Support and salary per month, 200 to 1,200 gold pieces. Research grants per month, 200 to 1,200. And brace yourself, kids. Initial material expenditure, 20,000 gold pieces minimum. Remember, Gary cites these guys as being the computers of a quasi-medieval setting. All right, you're buying a supercomputer, and then you have to buy the software to run on it. You've got to buy all the spools of tape and flash drives and disks and information in the cloud. Because when you come back from a dungeon, you get this guy and you ask him a question. Look, we found this plate of metal. We don't know what it is. It detects his magic. What is it? Another good reason to have a sage, if your dungeon master is running Identify as it's written in the player's handbook, the minute you pick up a magic item, you're on a timer to be able to identify what that magic item is. And if you can't do it in that time done, you've got to find a sage to identify it. Your magic user won't know. The sage will have to research it. And a sage has to rest. A sage has to recuperate. And then we go on and it details out spies and so on and etc. This is interesting. A spying is a profession which is typically reserved for assassin characters. Other types of characters can be paid to spy, but such activity must be at the discretion of the dungeon master. The player characters must locate a likely prospect and then employ him or her in some capacity which is in accord with the prospective spy's station and occupation or profession. Then, by means of discussion and offers of payment, the player character must convince the character that he or she should become a spy. The sum offered can range from as little as 100 to as great as 10,000 gold pieces or more, depending on the situation and the person being approached. If the area where the spy must go is distant, the person or persons to be spied upon dangerous, or the prospective spy of high station, the likelihood of acceptance is low unless the pay is exceptional in money and possibly magic or land or position or some other valuable consideration. Payment must always be made by installment, part on taking the assignment, the balance upon completion of the assignment. Use the assassin spying table to determine success of any mission, treating the spy as a first-level assassin on his or her first mission, second on the second, and so on. Such spies can never become more proficient at spying than the 8th level in any event. So I'm going to pause and I'm going to answer some questions, and depending on the discussion, we may or may not have time to get into henchmen. I have got so much stuff to do this weekend. We'll just have to see. So going back, looking at the discussion. Oops. Dennis over on Facebook says, I understand about the cost, but what about henchman personality? Can you talk about that as well? Yes. There's a whole great section, and you know what? We'll dive into details on that on the next on the Monday live stream. But yes, NPC personality is a huge thing, and there are mechanics here for creating those personalities. You might have a frugal and brave henchman. You might have a spendthrift, wanton henchman, or hireling rather. There's a huge section on creating their personalities. And Dennis says, reputation plays also concerning the party. If a party's henchmen get killed or killed foolishly, or the party doesn't take care, then the party should suffer in encounters when seeking you. Absolutely. Yes. Word's going to get around. If you leave town with 10 heavy foot and, 2 return, one carrying the other, and they take their pay and immediately go to the bar and start talking about how, yeah, we came on a cave with a bunch of skeletons scattered outside and a few loose dragon scales on the ground, and the bosses laughed and said, okay, go in and see what's in there, guys. And, my 8 friends got eaten by a dragon, and Sven here got nearly bitten in half. Oh, absolutely, it's going to affect it. That's a very good point, Dennis. First edition is the only place I know that goes into detail about sages. I will give second edition a shout that also talks about sages. Well, I think first edition is absolutely the best place for sage information. Thank you for the very insightful comments over on Facebook from Dennis there. So yeah, let's go. Look at YouTube. Next level stuff, indeed. Yes, it is. One problem with 5th edition is that you get a huge ton of money, but you don't really have much. Yeah, later editions, I guess, just expected you to make coin angels or something. I don't know. This kind of setup would make money really fun to get and spend. It does. It really, it does. Resource allocation is a lot of fun. And you can't tell me that that's just some narrow thing that only I think of. Look how popular games like SimCity and, Sim Anything games, and even board games like Carcassonne and so things, they're all about resource management. And it all started right here. It's all right here. I suppose it's bean counting that people just skip over, but you have to think of how much planning goes into an expedition. You're going to need months of rations for this platoon of specialists. Absolutely. Even if you've got a character, a cleric who can create food and drink. All right. Okay, I'm creating food and drink, but that's 1 or 2 first level spells devoted just to creating food and drink that could be better spent on find traps or cure light wounds. And I, as a hireling, would like to know that the party was a little less tight-fisted, that they would spend some money on some cheese and sausages and a barrel of small beer and a small cask of wine to throw on their saddle or in the back of the wagon for us light foot, rather than just say, oh, wizard, just create some bread and milk day in and day out. And then if I take a spear to the chest, well, he really needs his cure light wounds for us. Sorry. He's only got the 2 because he created food and drink for you guys. It also makes it super cool when PCs need to go on private/stealth missions, leaving the troops behind and limiting their options and supplies. It certainly does. I mean, if you want to catch the monsters in the keep on the Borderlands unaware, I mean, they're in a ravine, a U-shaped ravine, and all their caves look out into the middle. You might drum up a goodly amount of hirelings and possibly even a henchman or 2 in the keep. But do you want them to camp out by the road, or do you want them to go in with you? Because if they go in with you, they're not going to be quiet. And consider that, I mean, that's something you got to balance. It's like, yeah, we're going to the dungeon. We've got 30 troops with us. The thief who needs to move silently, he's going to need to be really far ahead of that bunch. How do I work Cassandra from the Greek myths into a D&D campaign? I would actually, if you're talking about the actual Cassandra, I would say just gin up an NPC, just a high level NPC, and use maybe the sage tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and give her some non-specific knowledge from every place. Maybe. But if you're talking about a Cassandra type character, I would just go with a sage. and then under personality types, make sure they have liar as one of their personality types, because nobody's going to believe them. A crawl reference. Wow. Let's say you don't want a sage following you around. He'll just get killed by a shapeshifter and dumped in the swamp like in Crawl. Yeah. Conversely, Egg Shen in Big Trouble in Little China. Although I maintain that Egg Shen was was either a magic user or a cleric. Egg Shen was either a magic user or a cleric, incapable of holding his own in the dungeon adventure that is the last act of Big Trouble in Little China. And if you haven't seen Big Trouble in Little China, go watch Big Trouble in Little China. It's a fantastic Dungeons and Dragons movie. You would have to give it to things that the players have no control over, so that it always comes true. Yeah, that's the Cassandra. I have actually never seen Crawl. I wanted to see Crawl when it came out. I played the video game from Williams a lot. Beastmaster. I actually I read the novelization of Beastmaster, and the Sword and the Sorcerer. Uh, Beastmaster, I don't remember, except it was just kind of a generic fantasy book. Of the Sword and the Sorcerer is an exceptionally porny book. My 13-year-old self was like, oh, at the Sword and the Sorcerer novelization. Very porny book. Although, what I know about Beastmaster is actually related to D&D in an ancillary way, because of course you guys should all know about the TV show Community and the episode Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. If you haven't seen it, find it on your streaming service and watch it. It is a fantastically hilarious episode. I've talked about it a lot on the show. So the relation to D&D is that one of the characters in the TV show Community, who was played by Chevy Chase, and I want to say his name's not Clark, Pierce Hawthorne. Hawthorne is he's in his 60s, and he's going back to community college. He's a billionaire. He's just doing it for shits and giggles, and he's a horribly obnoxious person, which I know was quite a stretch for Chevy Chase to play. But they have this costume party, and Pierce is a man out of time when he tries to be, when he cares to be try to connect with the rest of the people on the show. He makes really out of date references, and so there's a costume party, and Pierce shows up in a muscle costume, which is just like a tight-fitting sweatshirt that's got padding sewn under it, so it looks like you've got abs and pecs and big biceps, and it's flesh colored. And he's got like a red bandana, a sword, a loincloth, this muscle shirt, and like this fake stuffed falcon on his arm. And they're like, and people are like, nice Conan outfit. Who are you supposed to be? And he's like, I'm the Beastmaster. Have you guys seen it? Haven't you guys seen Beastmaster? I'm the Beastmaster. So there's your D&D Beastmaster reference. But I want to wrap up, and I know it's only been an hour. I could spend at least a couple more hours, because I want to talk about Dennis's question about personalities for all of these guys, and I want to talk about more about henchmen, not hirelings. Henchmen, they are different, but it's been about an hour. Like I said, today is going to be exceptionally busy. Tomorrow is going to be exceptionally busy. Sunday is Mother's Day. I've got like 5 days of stuff to try and cram into 2.5 days, so I'm kind of have to wrap up today, but. Next Monday, I think we're gonna pick right up on Monday, and we're you know what, live I will generate the personality stats of a henchman, and an expert hireling, and we will talk more about expert hirelings. A little bit of a spoiler. I know these have all sounded like fairly mundane guys, except for the sage. It's when you get into henchmen that you start talking about having an extra NPC in the party who can actually do stuff other than just stab it with spears and hand you flasks of oil and hold a torch up. So yeah, I don't know that we have that many folks on the distaff side who watch the live stream and what percentage of them might be moms. But if you're a mom and you're watching this, happy Mother's Day. And Samuel Lee is absolutely right. Call your moms. Okay? It's Mother's Day. Call your moms. Do something wonderful for your wife. If she's the only mom you've still got around. But be that as it may, have an absolutely wonderful weekend. It was great watching today, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. I want to see. I want to see those. Those are rookie numbers. We got to pump those numbers up because remember, a convention is coming when we hit 1,000. And I'm going to answer Cerulean's question because I don't want to just leave him cold here. For hirelings, how would I as GM choose a good mix of troops? Go by, if you're using the Dungeon Master's Guide, go by the table to see what's available. And the smaller the town, the less you're gonna the less you're gonna have. Larger cities, you're going to be able to get 20 heavy foot, 40 heavy foot, something like that. Little towns with a population of 100, you might not be able to pick up anything but a link boy and a couple of animal handlers. So just keep in mind the population of the town and the size of party and what they're looking for. You know, if they only want a link boy, if they're just like, look, we just need somebody to carry a torch into the dungeon for us because, you know, we're all humans and we all need our hands to fight, that shouldn't be a problem. There'll be some aspiring young lad who's more than willing to stand in the back with a lantern on the end of a pole and your alabaster bodies between him and the bad guys. So I will see you all on Monday. Peace, everyone.